Hello, I'm Layne Hartsell with the Korea IT Times. I'm here with Derrick, Jensen, and Lierre Keith, ecophilosophers, writers, authors, appeared on Fox News for discussing issues related in the United States, and I can go on and on about you all. The topic today is part of this Technics and Civilization series that I have that's been going on for a number of years. And it's a lot of it's based on Derrick's work and Lewis Mumford, of course, I got the term from. I wrote a paper on bioregionalism as a theoretic ecology, and this was a paper that came about after reading Endgame and Bright Green Lies. You sent me an early copy of that, and I started this paper a while back, but I published it about 2 years ago. And the core issue is coming to terms with civilization. So one thing that Derrick has done a great service to society is he's provided the context of civilization and provided a way to look at it. And if you look at the logic and the just the term itself, it's all right there in the term. And then there's a culture that goes along with it, as Derrick points out. And this culture we can see in Gilgamesh. So Gilgamesh goes to the forest with Enkidu. They cut down the trees and so forth, bring them back to Europe. You are UK. So I took this and I said, okay, well, let's take the literature, Mencius, Plato, Tertullian, and on up to modern, Gary Snyder, Jensen, and so forth, and put this into a scientific discussion also with how much artifact and infrastructure is there. Like there's more artifact now than there is biological material. I could go on and on. There's cables, that they put under the ocean that are something like 1.3 million kilometers and this kind of thing. And then I added a conclusion that a reorientation would be necessary. So we're getting into a kind of geopsychology. The orientation is wrong. Also the metaphysics is wrong. But I want to discuss this with you more specifically, and go into this topic. And so, are there any general comments that come to mind just as I talk about this first? Let you start off with that.
Well, are we presuming that listeners um, know the definition of civilization and know what a technic is? Are we where are we starting with that?
Yeah, I think, how about providing your foundational argument for Endgame, and then we go with that.
Okay, so why don't I do civilization, you do agriculture?
Sure.
Okay, so if you look in the dictionary, civilization is defined often as like a very high state of culture or even the best culture. And that's not what it means. And when we hear somebody's acting civilized, that usually means they have manners. But that's not really what civilization means. And that's not the definition I'm using. And we run into this all the time where people think, oh, do you not want to have culture? Do you not want to have any culture? And that's humans are culture. Why don't you take over with the culture making for a minute? And then I'll come back and do civilization.
Yeah, just that humans, that's what we do is we make culture. That we are, we've got these enormous brains and we're not driven by instinct anywhere near to the extent that other animals are. We have a lot of choices in our behavior. Some of it certainly is driven by instinct, and we have to eat and we have to breathe and, we reproduce and stuff like that. But still, there's just a vast amount of our behavior that we get to choose. And, that behavior has to be molded by the culture. I mean, we have to learn. Our brains are so big that we're born premature. And if you think about pretty much any other animal that you could name, even the ones that are like dogs and cats who are born blind and have to open their eyes and stuff, it's only a few weeks and then they're up and moving. And humans, I mean, it just takes forever to raise a baby human to being anywhere near self-sufficient. And it's because our brains are so big that if, we were born with full-size brains, none of us would make it out. It's not possible. So we have to be born really immature. And then there's this huge process of building that brain, the encephalization and just the growth of that organ. And it's an immense process. So that is part of the thing. So we have to teach as well. We're not just growing physically, but we have to, import the culture to our young, because those are going to be the rules. And so, what is our greatest gift is also kind of our downfall, because no other animal acts as destructively as we can. So if we're not told the correct stories, and not kept in line by the other people in our tribe in terms of sociopathic behavior, we can go the other direction, as we see, and you end up with a culture of sociopaths. So they can rule instead of being kept in check. We've got those people are rewarded highly, and they're the ones that now are in charge of everything. So we've kind of gone the wrong path here, and there were reasons for that. So, do you want to take it back to?
So,
Okay.
so culture is one thing, and I I don't believe that bears or cows or wolves don't have culture. But
Right.
I'm not a bear, a wolf, or a cow, so I can't really comment. I just know they got accents. Um, and different behaviors in different places. But and humans will have this wide variety of cultures. And that's not what a civilization is. Civilization is, and this is defensible both linguistically and historically, civilization is a way of life characterized by the growth of cities. And the reason I say that's defensible linguistically is the word civilization comes from civitatis, Civitatis, which means state or city. And it's defensible, but historically, because when we think about the great civilizations, we generally think about city-based peoples. Um, when people talk about the Talawa, that's where I live now, they don't usually talk about the Talawa civilization. And that doesn't mean that they're living horrible lives. In fact, they lived quite fine lives. Um, and they lived here for 12,000 years. It's just they didn't have cities. Well, that's nice, Derrick, but what's a city? So, a city I define as people living in numbers large enough to require the importation of resources. And require is a key word here because people have always had some sort of trade, or often have some sort of trade, almost always have some sort of trade, where we have a few extra clamshells and somebody else has some extra
Mhm.
buffalo skins or deer skins. So we'll just trade them back and forth. And uh, when you say require, that means a couple things have taken place. One of them is that it means your way of life can never be sustainable. Because if you require the importation of resources, it means you've denuded the landscape of that particular resource, and your city will have to continue to expand its area from which it takes that required resource. And the other thing it means is that your way of life has to be militaristic. And I want to put an asterisk there and come back to it in a minute on the first one. Um, it also means your way of life has to be based on war or conquest, because if you require the importation of resources, trade will never be sufficiently reliable. Because if you need this resource and the people in the next watershed over won't trade you for it, you're going to take it because you require it. And um, so civilization is always based on drawing down. It's based on too many people living in a place, drawing down the resources, and then expanding to take them from others. And there can be various rationalizations put forward for this, as in the common one is we give them culture and they give us raw materials. And that's nice, except that it comes to the point of a gun. And also, those resources are other living beings. Those are bear or beaver or trees, other beings who are required for that other place. And then I want to say one more thing, and then we'll throw it back to agriculture, which is the asterisk I wanted to put is just yesterday we got into a conversation about what would be the carrying capacity of modern day London. And that's once they went through all of the canned goods so they can no longer import anything. How many people could actually survive in London or Tokyo or New York City or Mexico City? And so the we were debating whether it would be 100 people could live in the London metropolitan area. Once you get rid of all the canned goods, once you eat all the dogs and cats, once you eat all the other humans that are dead, you're not killing them, but it's like, because what can actually grow in the city that you can eat? And rats. I mean, you
And
reduce
pigeons,
rats and pigeons,
We were-
Okay.
and you could maybe support the actual carrying capacity. With no carrying capacity is how many people, no, how many of any species can live in a particular place in a particular way forever. And so you can have an island that has 100 deer could live there forever, and that's all fine if that's its carrying capacity. But if you could have 800 deer there, but if you do, they're going to eat too much, they're going to poop too much, they're going to walk around too much and destroy the soil, but with their hooves, and uh, and pretty soon the carrying capacity will collapse. It will drop down from 1,000 deer to 500 deer to 200 deer, and at one point, the London metropolitan area probably could have supported 500 people, 1,000 people. It probably did at one point.
Well, because there would have been things in the river to eat. There
Yeah,
would
they
have
could
been
have eaten
fish.
stuff from the
So
river.
probably there would have been 20,000 people there, would have been my guess.
Oh.
Yeah, because all the wetlands, it's like
How
here.
big is London though?
It's huge, but it's
How many square miles? Because and then we should
well,
go back
like
to
here we had the Talawa,
yeah,
and they actually made like pretty dense villages because anybody that's on a coast or on a river can do that, can have a settled village. And those rivers would have been just as dense, and they have the whole coastline there. So,
Well, for
and so
example,
I think it would have been more, but it doesn't matter because now we think maybe 1,000 people could live there.
yeah, we're having an argument as to whether it would be 1,000 or whether it would be 200.
Because
You
it's
know, it's
just
like,
rats and
let
pigeons.
but it's not going to be 8 million.
There's no way.
let me
There's
let
no
me add,
food.
at Poverty Point, there on the Mississippi, it was larger than London was at the time of the arrival. So
Right,
people were
exactly.
that somehow the Native Americans were able to have these kind of nested village systems that weren't damaging to the land. But also, as Derrick points out, the trees were, you know, 8 times bigger, and the soil was 4 meters deeper, and so you had a very rich system compared to.
And here, the reason they could have so many is because the rivers were full of salmon. And I mean, like full of salmon. Like the Klamath is the second largest West Coast American river, West Coast United States river after the Columbia. So it's a big river. And even as late as the 1930s, it was described as the entire river as being, quote, black and roiling with fish.
Right.
It's unimaginable. And it would have been the
And you
same.
could literally just walk across. I mean, we hear that, but it was true. You could just walk across the river on the backs of the fish.
And even in the 50s, I heard
There's
that
people still alive who
there
remember
are
this.
people still alive.
Oh.
I don't know if they're still alive, but in my early talks in 2001 and 2, after I moved here, I would have people come up to me who had been around in the 50s who said that you could hear the runs for miles before you see them.
Right.
Yeah, for the whole day you could hear them
So
coming.
far.
And it would sound like rolling thunder in the distance, and it just got louder and louder and louder. And then finally the fish were there. But that's how many fish. And it wouldn't have been any different in London. I mean, it's right
Yeah.
on the river. So
And there's Atlantic salmon.
there would have been all of those fish. So I
And
think
every
a
other
fair number of
species.
people, but now it's nothing but cement. And once there's no imports, if you cut it all off, there's nothing there that anybody can eat except looks like rats and pigeons. I was like, I don't know what else anybody could eat that's there.
Mhm.
So that's it. So is it 1,000 or is it 100? But it's so it's drawdown. We have destroyed and destroyed and destroyed, and now way fewer people can live where once at least some people could live, because that's what it does. That's what civilization does. It eats everything,
Mhm.
and then it's gone. So anyway, so what did you want me to?
So do you want to ask another question or do you want to do agriculture?
Well, let's bring this out of abstraction into something that's happening today. So there's a massive fire. I want to go so people can kind of put this together. There's a massive fire in California in Palisades going on right now. President Trump, who's coming into office in about another week or so, says that the problem is that they wouldn't allow the water to come down from Canada because there's plenty of water, and because they want to protect a tiny little fish And he says, let the water flow because, you know, LA needs water. This is a practical concern, and there's a lot more to it than just tiny little fish and, you know, this little thing. But even if it were, I mean, isn't there some kind of problem ecologically going on? Because he's making an ecological argument here, right? He's saying he's going to be more ecological by feeding the forest and the people and this kind of thing.
Do you want to start?
Well, Robert J. Lifton talked about before you can commit any mass atrocity, you have to have what he called a claim to virtue. And you have to convince yourself that what you're doing is not, in fact, harmful, but instead beneficial. And this is true on a personal level, too. You know, nobody, including myself, has ever been a jerk. I've never once in my life been a jerk. Every time I have objectively been a jerk, I've had it fully rationalized. We rationalize our behavior. In fact, I think that's our primary use of our sentience, whatever it may be, is to rationalize whatever we want to do in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So this, we have to recognize a few things. One is that this may not be familiar to people in much of Southeast Asia. I don't know what those ecological regimes are, but much of the Western United States is fire dependent. They are fire based. I don't really like the term ecosystem because ecosystem is machine language. I prefer natural communities, but nobody knows what I'm talking about then.
Mm-hmm.
So with that caveat, I'll just say fire-based ecosystems and or fire-based communities. And what I mean by that is there are many species of trees in the West who require fire in order to open their cones. Lodgepole pines, for example, cannot reproduce. There are species of beetles who have fire detection and smoke detectors on their heads that they can smell the smoke and detect the heat, and they fly toward fires because once the fire cools, then they go in and start eating the dead wood.
Right.
And there's a species of woodpecker called blackback woodpecker who has a black back because it moves around after fires to
Eat those beetles.
eat those beetles.
And they're black because they're covered in
And they're
soot.
black so that nobody can see them
They have-
against the tree. These require fire.
Fire is a member of the community. It's just like the lodgepole pines and just like the beetles and just like the woodpeckers. Fire is a member of these communities. It belongs there. They've all evolved together.
For
Without fire,
millions and millions of years.
all of these forests are gone.
Mm-hmm.
They can't exist without them. because
including
they-
catastrophic fires.
They have
cataclysmic
to have
fires.
these fires.
Small fires, big fires, both. And so before we talk about anything else, when we talk about a fire in California, we have to talk about the fact that these communities were built in fire-prone regions. And it's no different than freaking out when you build on a floodplain of the Mississippi and your house ends up a foot underwater. It's the same deal.
Right.
But the problem is not the fires. The problem is houses built in fire areas. And there are things, we can have this discussion, there are things people can do to fireproof their houses. You know, maintain a 100-foot range. Don't stack firewood outside your house. You know, and
Metal roofs.
metal roofs. There's all sorts of things you can do like that. Don't doggy doors can actually be a harm in areas where
Yeah, because it's
fire-prone regions.
actually it's the embers that make the fire in the houses a lot. The wind will blow the embers in, and the inside of the house is where the fires will start because all this stuff in here is really flammable. You can pretty well protect the outside of the house from a lot, but the moment the ember is in here, it's over. It's just going to catch fire to the wood and to the furnishings and the curtains and whatever. It's all going to go up. So that's any entrance, you're supposed to block that off if there's a fire. So doggy doors.
So first off, I almost never. Okay, I'll back up a second. There was a big fire here last summer, 2 summers ago.
2 summers ago.
2 summers ago, there was a big fire up the canyon, and electricity got knocked out here for
Almost a month.
yeah. And I mean, that was inconvenient, but everybody's going, oh my gosh, the forest is so hammered. The forest has just been destroyed. But I drive that canyon not infrequently, and it's absolutely beautiful. It's a mosaic, is what happens with most of these fires. That there'll be areas, there'll be many, many acres or hectares or whatever unit we want to use, um, that are completely burned, and then there are areas that are completely untouched, and there are areas where a third of the trees were cut or were not cut, were burned. There's areas where one tree out of 20 was burned. There's it's and this is what happens. So if there's a big fire in Southern California, nature's going, whoa, okay, good. That's or maybe they don't even do that. They're going, yippee! This is regeneration. This is what needs to happen. So the first is that. I guess that's I'm running out of steam. Why don't you take over?
What else do you want?
Yeah,
Where do you want to go?
Well, I
Well, I
wanted,
mean, his using it as an
So a lot of
excuse.
people are like they get upset about fires as if it's some kind of horrible thing. And I'm not saying there isn't a terrible human cost sometimes. I don't want you to
I
think
wouldn't want
that.
my house to burn
I
down.
wouldn't either, and I'm not numb to the fact that people's lives are in danger right now. But if you live in a fire dependent region, this is what you have to
Like a
expect.
flood.
It's just like people building in the floodplain.
Or
This
even
is
more
just
simply,
what you can't stop nature from being nature. Fire is a part of life out here. And
if you live next to the coast, right on the coast, it's not even like worrying about tsunamis because those don't happen very often. It's more like worrying about your paint going off because of the salt in the air.
yeah,
That's
right,
how common fires are.
right. Or like everything molds
The
here in
Blue
fire.
Mountains in Eastern
It's
Oregon, the Blue Mountains were called that because they always look blue because there's so many fires every summer.
all the smoke.
I'll bet that's true of Blue Ridge too, but I don't know that. I don't know that, but I do know it for the Blue Mountains of Northeastern Oregon.
but
So so that's I mean, and then civilization comes along and people build very permanent, very expensive houses. And we have this way of life based on cities. So now you've got way too many people crammed into an area that is going to catch fire. And then
right.
there's no way out. So that's, there's
And
these people in an absolute panic on the highway. And believe me, I feel for them. That is an absolutely terrifying
Well,
situation. I've had to think about it myself. I mean, where I live right here in the redwoods is probably never going to burn because the redwoods aren't a fire dependent species, but it's not 10 miles away that there's this canyon where in fact it did. It was absolutely burned, 2 summers ago. It's a completely different ecosystem, once you leave the coast and get
I have friends who live
yeah,
up in
so
the
like we
canyon
took
who
in
had
refugees essentially because
yeah,
they had nowhere to. It's like everything's on fire. I was like, come on down, we'll
and
be
they
fine.
feared for their houses.
And
And I
that was
understand
terrifying.
that.
So they came and they stayed here, but that is just part of it's just part of life. And the problem is this pattern of civilization because in any previous generations up until very very recently, people would have just left. Like
And
everything you owned was
you
what you
carry.
carried, and it was no big deal. Even if you lost it, you could just make it again because everybody knew how to weave blankets and how to make flint and how to make the whatever you needed. It was all there, like how to spin and you know how to make little nets and how to arrows and the spears, and like everybody knew how to do it. So it wasn't a big deal. You would just walk away from the forest fire and then you would go back when it was over. And this is just it's way too many people and they're living in a completely insane way of life, which we're all stuck in. I'm not blaming them. I live it too. So I'm not like blaming individual people here. And I've got friends down there and I'm terrified for them. But this is, we did this and
And
you can't fight nature on this level. This is just what the world is supposed to look like in Southern California. And you can only fight it so long. So,
I want to say one more thing too, which is that we were lied to by the Forest Service, where they have Smokey the Bear, and it's also scary. Actually, forest fires and grass fires, yes, they do kill some animals, but for the most part, they the trees are the ones who have to worry, and they've evolved with it, so they live with it. But most forest fires move actually pretty slowly, and most they don't kill many animals. Um, uh, if you're a ground dwelling animal, you go about 2 inches below the surface and you're great. Even insects burrow down and then come back up. If you're a bird, you fly away, and almost never do these fires take place during nesting season, which is, I mean, they would. That's a beauty of evolution, is that if you were a bird who nested during fire season, you would not
survive.
survive. So the birds just fly away, and most fires move like 3 to 4 miles an hour or 2 to 3 miles an hour. So most bears and deer, unless you get really unlucky and go down, a canyon where you get hit,
And it
you
goes
know,
down.
but they just amble away, or they get in water. They're not. It's not like we saw in the movies. Um,
Well, I think just to,
what they're a danger to is they're a danger to human structures and therefore human lives, and
Yeah.
also to animals. They're a danger to animals who are kept in pens. Like if you have a pasture
Yeah.
that has
Domestic animals who
that
can't leave.
has
Yeah.
no way for them to leave.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Again, I'm not discounting the loss of somebody who loses their beloved horse in a fire. It's just that it's a fire dependent region.
Well, I think that this part right here is what we're talking about with civilization is if you don't know what civilization is and you don't know the biotic community or the natural community or ecosystem, then then you're going to be caught in this kind of thing. For just take a small example. I mean, where I live, there are cobras, like big, like king cobra, big ones. And I've never seen one. Actually, I live in a forest here. I mean, you can see, and I've never seen a king cobra. Uh, but I have seen some snakes. But again, we know what these are. We know what to look for. So you don't leave clothes laying around in the corner, and there's it's like it becomes part of your lifestyle. We adapt to live with these creatures, and it's the same thing with forest fires. We don't have that here because it's a rainforest and it's wet. But in the dry season, I guess this could happen. And as you can see, that we don't. I mean, we have uh, a metal roof, but the trees are, there's some area here back, and then the big forest, and all that's on the mountain. But I think that it's this adaptation. And then I've seen. I mean, I'm not. I wouldn't survive in very long in nature, but I've seen indigenous people do what Lierre was saying. They'll go out here and they'll live. They can get 80% of their food right from here. I've watched it happen. I mean, I've been with them and watched them. And they say, "Oh, hey, you can eat this thing. There's fish right there." They take a piece of bamboo, they make a little basket out of it, and they catch the fish. It's all like second nature to them. It's like when we go and, something that we're adapted to in civilization. So that's what,
Like going to the grocery store.
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, like what, like, it's that easy for them. That's
I
the,
had there's a sort of friend of mine I knew who so we live in Del Norte County and the next county south is Humboldt County in California. And she grew up around here. She's my age. And she said when she was a kid, they lived a slightly more rural. They weren't really on the coast. It was a little bit further inland. And most of her friends were indigenous kids. She was one of the only white kids. And during the summer, their parents would just sort of toss them out into just go play, have a summer life. Like we got stuff to
right.
do. So the kids were just sort of left to roam. And she said it was really funny because her mom would give her and her brother a little packed lunch for the day and be like, go have fun, come back at dinner. Just, if you're bleeding, come home, but otherwise just go.
All right.
But they would be at lunch to go and have a day in the forest. And her Native American friends just thought that was hysterical. It's like, why in the world are you bringing food? They knew how to get food out of the forest. Like there's so much to eat out here. And they just thought it was hysterical that like their moms would pack a lunch for them. Why? There's like fish and there's rabbits and they know how to catch everything. And they could quickly dress it, skin it, whatever, get it ready, make a little fire, eat it, and then they go about, playing their kid games. But they were completely self-sufficient at, 8, 9, 10 years old. Everybody knew where to get food. This was in my lifetime. She's my age, so it's not even that long ago that everybody, even small children, had those skills, and it was right here. It wasn't like some magical faraway, fairyland. This is right here in Northern California. So that is the life that we all should be having. It shouldn't be in these giant cities. This is not what we're meant for. And certainly the world that we've created in these huge cities is absolutely it's a battle against nature. That's what civilization is. Like literally, that's what it is fighting nature.
Right.
And so there's going to be these terrible clashes sometimes where things like fires and floods happen. And it is, it's just, there's no meeting in the middle here and nature
No
is going to
way.
win.
Right.
There's not any way through it. You
Lierre,
can't make a bargain with it.
you talk about farming. So we were getting to agriculture with civilization. So around 5,000 years ago, for example, you've got like actual agriculture farming settled there in Mesopotamia. Can you talk about this and what this has done, and also about the human body, because you've written a book about the physiology. Yeah.
So civilization, like Derrick said, is you've got people living in densities that require the importation of resources. And what that means is they need those resources because they've used up their own. And if you think about what a city is, all that land, every last inch has been taken by humans, right? So think about New York or London or whichever city. It's just nothing but concrete, right? It's just stone or whatever, but there's nothing there that's actually a living creature except humans and a few things like cockroaches. So everything has to come from somewhere else. So the food, the water, the fuel, the energy source, everything has to be brought in from somewhere else. And what makes this possible is this thing called agriculture, this one very specific human activity. And this is why civilization, like Derrick was saying, it doesn't just mean culture. It's one very specific pattern that's based on this thing called a city. And what makes all of it possible is this one activity called agriculture. So what agriculture is, in very blunt terms, you take a piece of land and you clear every living thing off it. And I mean down to the bacteria, like everything has to go. And then you plant it just for humans.
So like right now, we look out the window and you can do the same, and everybody can do the same looking behind you. There's like 10 different species of trees I can see just through the door. And then there's bushes. And then down below that, you've got mice and you've got rabbits and you've got squirrels and you've got all sorts of insects. And that's not even in the soil.
Yeah.
And then you got frogs. And it's like all of that. And so if we were going to turn this into a wheat field, we got to.
Everything has to
Okay.
go.
No,
Every
shut up.
last one of those plants, all of the animals, and then all of the soil eventually it's all going to be gone. And then you're just going to plant it for humans. So you're going to have all of this would just be wheat or corn or soy. You pick your crop, pick the region of the world, but it's going to be one thing. And that is called an annual monocrop. And it's annual because it's only going to leave a season or two. It's so not even a whole year. And it's a monocrop because it's one thing. So to give you an example, in a grassland, 1 square meter of a grassland usually has at least 25 different plants in it. So that's like how many different species there are. That's just of plants. And they are all doing slightly different things and they're all working together. But all of them make this biotic community that is going to be, very dense with life. And the whole point of it is to keep life going. It's just what life does. So that's the problem with agriculture, is that it's just mass extinction. And that's literally what it's done around the world. Every single place agriculture could have taken, it has taken. There's no more continents left for us to clear and cut and just take. So number one, mass extinction. Every single day, 200 species are going extinct. 200 every single day. And this is why, is because we're living this crazy way where we think we get to just take the land and do what we want with it. And they've got nowhere else to go. So 200 every day. That alone should just make people cry. They're never coming back.
That's
And we're doing it.
That's above background loss, right?
Yeah. I mean, because I think it's like 10,000 times what it should be normal.
Right.
Yeah, because everything's always going extinct eventually. Like 98% of what's ever been alive is extinct now. But it's fine because new things evolve to take their places and they do it a little bit better or a little different. And, you can look back at all the different primates that became human and it's all really fascinating, but that's true for every single species. Like it's, everybody evolves. And if you don't fit well into your environment, your little branch is going to fall off and another one will come from it. So this is just how life has progressed. But we are doing this at a rate that is, vertebrate evolution came to a halt at some point in the 20th century. So the vertebrates have just stopped evolving because there isn't enough land left. There's no space left for them. And that should just send a cold chill of horror down your neck. It's horrendous what we've done. So yeah, we can pile on a lot of evil statistics here. But the point is, agriculture, that's what it is. Agriculture started in maybe 14 different places around the globe. There's a little bit of debate, and it always starts in river valleys. And there's a reason for that, because it's based on annuals. I said they only live a few seasons. And you have to understand the difference between annuals and perennials. So perennial plants live a long, long time. And where I am in the redwoods, like the trees live 2,000 years at least.
Right.
So a long time. But what that means is they have lots and lots of years to achieve maturity and then figure out different strategies for reproduction. The annuals don't have that. They don't even have a year. They've got 2 or 3 seasons. So sort of across the board, they only reproduce one way, and that's through seeds. And those seeds tend to be big because they're putting all of their future, all of their hope is in that seed. That's the whole future of their species is in that seed. So they tend to be big. And what that means is that some of them are big enough that it was just barely worth the human caloric output to harvest those seeds and try to eat them. So that's one thing. So they had to be big enough. And you're going to find that in river valleys because there's so much disturbances in the constant sort of flood cycle of rivers that you have a lot of annuals there. Because the role of annuals in a biotic community is they're like the emergency responders, the first responders. And I like to use the image of if you cut yourself, you might need stitches or a band-aid. You got to hold that skin together, and then eventually it knits back
Right.
on its own. Well, that's what annuals do. They're the band-aid. So if ground is cleared for some reason, which it is in nature sometimes, there'll be a fire or a flood or an earthquake or a mudslide or whatever, you're going to have bare ground, and nature knows that's an emergency. And nature also loves an opportunist. So there are these segment of plants, about 10% of plants are annuals. And they figured out, oh, look, there's going to be once in a while an area that's cleared. This is going to be our moment. We're going to make giant seeds, and those seeds are going to wait in the soil. They can't compete against the perennials, so they're going to wait it out. But the moment that those perennials are cleared off by some emergency, boom, all the annuals spring to life. And they will cover that ground as fast as they can. And they'll be there for a few years, but eventually the perennials knit back together and they will cover that area again. And then all the annuals go dormant again. So in areas that are constantly being disturbed, like floodplains, you're going to find way more annuals. There's all these annual grasses. And like I said, a few of them were even big enough that it was worth human effort to try to harvest them. So humans started to do this. Now comes the big question. Why did we completely transform our way of life such that we were dependent on annual crops? And nobody really knows the answer to this. There are theories, but what you were probably told in school was that, everything was nasty, brutish, and short, and people were constantly hungry and living in fear.
Hobbes.
And look, this amazing thing happened. People figured out how to grow enough food that they could store some, and hunger was over. And that is a lie. That is just the biggest untruth we've ever been told. It's complete propaganda. They may have thought it was true when they said that to you. I remember being told this in 4th grade, and it was like, oh, thank God, we figured it out. How terrifying. People were hungry and cold and miserable.
Civilization.
They figured out how to grow wheat, and everything was great. That's not true. In the archaeological record, what you find, the hunter-gatherer societies, people have near perfect health. They're six
Yeah.
inches taller, their teeth fit perfectly, and their bones are long and strong and beautiful and show basically no signs of disease. And then you get to agriculture, and immediately humans they shrink 6 inches, their teeth start falling out, they're riddled with cavities. They've got all kinds of horrendous conditions based on things like lack of iron. So they have like holes in their skulls, essentially. This very, very painful condition, especially for children, that they would get from low iron in their diets.
Mm.
A list of conditions that just are completely unseen, unheard of for hunter-gatherers. So this is why an archaeologist can pick up a bone and tell you in 5 seconds whether it was a hunter population or a farming population, because the farmers look horrible and the hunters always look great. And you can even see there's famous cases where they compare the bones 4,000 years apart. It's the same people living in the exact same river valley, and the original ones were the hunters. And now we've got agriculture, and you look at the bones, and you cannot even believe because it's so clear how different. It's just terrifying.
Can I add in here? I'm trained in biology in advanced degrees, and I talk to just regular people that are in this education system you talk about, and I tell them this information. And even with my training and all of that, and now I'm older, so people like listen a little more, but they also just kind of like, okay, you're off over there. They still will say, oh, but people weren't healthy and they died early and all that. I'm like, we can see the bones.
Yeah,
No.
the evidence couldn't be clearer, and it's universal. It's around the world, no matter where you go. It's the same pattern
Yeah.
that you have near perfect health. The beautiful dentition, the perfect bones, the joints even into old age. There's always like a social group of people who are the elders. So not everybody died. It's true that the infant mortality was fairly high. But if you made it past the age of 5, we've only added about 2 years to our lifespan. Like, oh, they all died when they were 30. That's not true. That was
In
the
the cities,
average.
in
If
the
you
cities,
take
they
out
died.
the well, if you take out, that the chunk where they die really young, that is true. About 50% of the children would maybe
Yeah.
have died at a young age. But if you made it past the age of 5 and got over all of that, your lifespan would have been basically what we have now, and you also would have been a lot healthier into old age. You wouldn't have been riddled with the kinds of problems that we have now. So anyway, why did they do it is the big question. And the only answer that has ever made any sense to me is the one where the hypothesis is that these foods are very addictive. That particularly the wheat, but all of them, there is a fair amount of they basically turn into opioid-like substances. So, you've probably heard of gluten in wheat. It turns in this stuff called gluteomorphine in your guts, and it is a morphine-like, you get high, you'll get a little
Right.
buzz from it. And you might not realize it because
I
you're
feel
eating it
like that
five
when I
times
eat
a day or
pasta.
something.
If I eat
Well,
pasta,
there's all these people when you start talking, like, could you go gluten free? No, I could never give up bread. Oh my God, I'd rather die.
right.
And that is why. Like, why do you think that's true? That's like the alcoholic saying, I can't give up my drink. It's exactly this. It's because it's addictive. We shouldn't feel
Yeah.
this way about food.
Well,
So,
the really easy one to think about that way is sugar.
oh yeah,
That
sugar.
it's like, and and
I mean, we're
I
half
don't,
dead in
I
America from
don't,
the sugar.
I don't eat a lot of sugar, but I used to, and I would find that uh, I would get headaches. I would get withdrawal
No, you do.
symptoms
Absolutely. Yeah.
if I didn't have some sugar after 12 hours,
Yeah.
24 hours, something like that.
And eventually, your pancreas adjusts, and so you stop getting those blood sugar crashes. But the first few days can be really rough. So,
Right.
and what they've shown in some studies is that it can be more addictive than cocaine, sugar, to mammalian brains. So we have not put ourselves on a good path here. So that is the only hypothesis that's ever made any sense because it's backbreaking labor for piss poor nutrition.
Right.
Why would we have done this when we were so healthy and life was so good before we did it? Think about those kids in Humboldt County in my lifetime who could just wander around and like, oh yeah, we'll just eat some food now. We're hungry. That's what life was like for most humans until very, very recently. That was how we lived.
It's
That was
interesting.
it. That
I don't,
was
I don't think we
200,000
have,
years.
I don't think we
That
have
was,
any idea how fecund wild nature was.
yeah.
That there's this great book called Sea of Slaughter by Farley Mowat that is just a lot of contemporary accounts of what the early European explorers saw in North America, like skies being darkened from horizon to horizon by flocks of birds, and what we said about the salmon earlier. And we have no conception. And something in your region of the world that has just killed me is I think you sent me an article the other day about how they were really excited because they found six, I believe it was,
Yep.
Mekong, the giant catfish,
Yeah.
and six when I can remember 30 years ago, before the dams were put in, when my understanding, and I don't mean to tell you your region, but my understanding is that a lot of people's lives were based on these catfish. They were basically people of the catfish, like they're people of the salmon here.
Yeah.
That and now they're happy when they find six, and that's only in the last 30 years.
These catfish are bigger than we are, bigger than I am.
Yeah.
They're huge. I wanted
So
to,
we're still doing it. We're still killing everything that could
Yeah,
infect.
I heard that the the catfish migration was by mass the largest migration on the world. That it was larger than like buffalo
Buffalo.
moving north to south or south to north, or larger than the plains ungulates in the Serengeti. Um, that's how numerous I heard they were. Somebody I interviewed told me that 10, 15 years ago.
that's the Mekong catfish.
Yeah, and the point is that this this was that's one reason people didn't need. Or here's another story: is that I knew a person who was married to a guy from Bangladesh, and when he was young, he's basically our age. When he was young, his mom would say, "Hey, can you go down to the river and get us some lunch?" And he would go fish and bring some lunch back. And by the time he was in his 20s, this would be by the time the 1980s rolled around, um, he could no longer do that because the river was so polluted that it no longer supported fish. And going to get us some lunch meant going to a convenience store and buying fish imported from Iceland. And I was like, that's the entire story of the
Right
last
there.
6,000 years right
That's it
there.
right there. And so now everybody's dependent on this system.
There
But
was a couple
agriculture,
things. There were a couple
oh,
things
go
you
ahead.
said. One is I think it's in your book, or maybe you told me this, that this thing about the last acre of today when they're taking these machines and they're going in and harvesting. There's a pretty horrific story there that no one driving these machines wants to do that last acre or whatever it is. Can you talk just a little bit about this in agriculture?
Yeah, I've heard this from, I've never witnessed this, but I've heard this from people who have driven those combines on those farms. So whether it's a cornfield or a wheat field or whatever, there's a few creatures that do still try to live there. So you've got some ground dwelling birds, you've got some snakes, some small mammals like mice, will try to still live in those cornfields. And of course, it's time for harvest. So along come, those huge machines. You can probably all picture them with the big rolling things, and they're harvesting as they go. And so of course all the animals are running in terror from the giant machine as the field's being cut. And then you get around this whatever 200 acres or however big it is, and then finally there's just that last acre. And everyone that I have ever talked to said they dread that last acre because all the animals are hiding in there and they've got nowhere else to go, and you have to do it. So they pass the machine through, but it's just a bloodbath behind you because all of those creatures are just getting slaughtered, and
I, I
they just
was
dread it all day because they
I
know what's
was thinking,
coming.
can't civilization at least maybe save that last acre, I mean, at least.
Well, I mean, all of them can't live there.
Yes,
So even
yes.
if you did leave it standing, they would all
They don't have
starve
anywhere to go.
because they need some actual land and some food. And it's what?
Two things. One is an image I've never forgotten is I was on this mesa in Colorado, looking down on a field that was being it was a hay field and it was being mowed, and there were 15, 20 hawks circling overhead.
They're waiting for the little corpses to,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
and they all just knew it was like seagulls at a
at a
at
dump.
at
Yeah,
a trawler or
I
a dump.
know.
That was one thing. The other thing is there's a phrase called extinction debt, which is we are currently in extinction debt, which means that not only are all the creatures who are going extinct, but there are also on the global scale the same thing is happening, that creatures are being dumped into this habitat just trying to stay alive, and they will go extinct over the next 20, 30 years because they can't stay in that one little acre.
Yeah.
And so we're crowding everybody in way more crowded than they should be.
They can't be sustained. It's too,
It's like there have been some right wingers who've gone, oh, I've seen spotted owls sitting on signs in a Walmart parking lot.
because they've got nowhere
I was
else to
like,
go.
yeah,
That's the last one.
that's not, that doesn't mean that that's
But
their
they can live
habitat.
there. There's nothing for
What
them
that
to
means
eat.
is its land just got cut.
They only can live in old growth because they need the holes in the old
And
trees.
just because the trees have been cut doesn't mean they die immediately. They have to go somewhere.
They're going to be around maybe for a few months, maybe a few years, but they can't reproduce. So this is the end. Anyway, that's one of the problems with agriculture is we just take all the land, but there's more problems, and because way more than just that happens as time goes on. So you've got what's the soil, and that is the basis of land life. We cannot have You could have sea life, you couldn't have land life without soil. That's what everything depends on. And the other problem with doing agriculture is that you're destroying that soil. Every time you do this, it's inevitable that you will destroy the soil because the soil needs to be covered. And the only way that soil grows is by the action of perennial polyculture. So lots of plants, all of them perennials, and you need animals in there to do their part as well. So you need that biotic community to be whole and to be in place. And so when you remove it, the soil is exposed, first of all, and to sunlight and to the pounding rain and to the wind. And just like us, when it's exposed, it dies. So that's problem number one. And then problem number two is that as you're doing this, the water has no way to actually enter the soil. So because the way that water is actually drawn in is through the perennial roots. So perennial plants have
Right.
really, really deep root systems. Annuals can't. They don't have time to produce deep roots. So, your average annual plant's only about this deep, but you may have seen pictures of these root systems that are 10, 12 feet deep, like in just enormous roots of like prairie grasses that are just, it's like this huge bundle. So most of a life on a grassland happens underneath the soil because on top of the soil, it's usually too hot in the summer. And I mean, obviously it's frozen in the winter. So everything retreats to underground. It's also moist under there because those deep root systems actually make a channel, a physical channel for the rain to actually enter the soil. And you know this is true if you think about it, because on a day that it rains, if you look around, there's going to be an area of grass, and then there's going to be like a bare parking lot that's got nothing on it but maybe some gravel, and that's going to be muddy. And there's going to be puddles, and those puddles are just going to get worse and worse the more it rains. But in the area where there's grass, you're not going to have a big puddle. Why? Because the water can actually enter that soil through those roots. So the perennial roots do that, and then it acts like a big sponge so that over the period where there's no rain, when it's hot, in the dry summer, there is water still down there. So life is still happening. Bacterial activity is still going on because there's enough moisture for it. So it's this giant sponge that, slowly gets used over the non-rainy season. But also because the roots are so deep, they can actually get down into the rock, into the bedrock below, and they break up the minerals. And the roots do that in combination with very specific bacteria. So again, it makes a community. But the roots are actually trading sugar to the bacteria, and then the bacteria they make acid, and they're actually eating the rock. So they'll trade the minerals for the sugar, and then the minerals get drawn up into the plants. And that's really how all of us get access to minerals. You and I cannot eat rock. We just can't. Like, your teeth can't do this, right? Just, you don't have to think about that very long. You're not going to go outside and eat rock for breakfast. But plants can do that. The plant roots will do that over time. And then they make all those minerals available in their bodies to the rest of life on Earth. So whether it's trees or grasses or whatever, they have that capacity that we do not. So that's where all the minerals are mostly coming from. Also, I mean, there's other places too, but that's a great deal of it. And we can't do that. So you got the minerals, you got the water, you've got just the fact that the soil is covered with the bodies of plants. And then that's how soil is made, is through the action of the roots of these perennial plants. Annuals just can't do that. It's not what they're here for. They're not old enough to do it. Their roots aren't deep enough to do it. But perennial grasses in particular are really, really good at making soil. And that's why, like, when the Europeans first got to the Midwest in the United States, the soil was 10 feet deep, and it can now only be measured in inches. So it didn't even take barely 100 years, and it just got wiped out because of agriculture. And this is why when people are like, oh, it's these wonderful, nonviolent, earth-friendly, life-supporting, plant-based diets. It's like, do you understand you wrecked an entire continent for this food? All the animals are gone. There's no more bison. Where do you think they went? They're gone because they wanted to plant corn and wheat. And you can't have bison if you're going to do that. So it was one or the other. The whole place was cleared. All the animals are gone. Those enormous herds. You could sit on a rock for 4 days and watch a single herd of bison thunder by. That's how, like, it's so hard for us to imagine how dense the life was out on the plains, but that's what it was like.
In California, you would see, if you were by a body of water, you would see a grizzly bear every 15
Every
minutes.
15 minutes. It's a grizzly bear. They're huge.
Unbelievable.
That's how dense. That's how much food there was for grizzly bears.
I mean, so you would see, honestly, that means that you would have seen a grizzly bear more often than I see a mosquito.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, I probably see, during the right season, I probably see 30 mosquitoes in a day if I'm outside most of the day. It would be like, oh, Layne, guess what? I saw a
A
mosquito.
mosquito today.
Yes, it's like I just saw a grizzly bear. It's like, yeah.
So this is the problem with agriculture. Once you do this, once you start taking over your land, you inevitably destroy it. Temporarily, you get this thing called the surplus. And so you get this bumper crop of humans because all of that land is only going to grow humans. You're not growing wolves on it. You're not growing bison on it. You're not growing lions on it. Nobody else gets to live there but just humans and, a few of the others that, like the mice and stuff, who can try to find a way. But for the most part, there is no life there but just going to humans. So all of that land just gets dedicated to us. So like where I live in a temperate forest, it's about 1 square mile to support a human being, is what I've heard. That's if you leave the forest intact. But if you take the forest down and you just grow wheat or, pick your crop, it's like 10 acres to support a human. So you can see there's like way more humans can grow if you just take all the land. I mean, that seems obvious, but you don't think about it until someone points it out. So this is the problem. You get this surplus of humans, but it's temporary. It's drawdown and it's overshoot. We have vastly overshot the capacity of this planet by doing this because we took all the land from all the other creatures. In the process of that, we're also degrading that land. So every year that goes by, in fact, means fewer and fewer humans and other creatures will ever be able to survive on it. So we're eating the future right now, and we're doing that, guess what, by eating oil. 50% of the nitrogen in every human being around the globe, if you test their nitrogen in their bodies, about 50% of it is straight from fossil fuel because we blew through all the topsoil. By 1950, the world was basically out of soil. And the only thing that stopped the inevitable collapse was fossil fuel. We figured out how to eat that by using the Haber-Bosch process. We were able to extract the nitrogen from oil and gas, and that's what we've been eating ever since. So all we did was put it off, and we also made the situation 4 times worse because by doing this, we didn't actually solve the problem. We just made a whole bunch more humans. So the population has quadrupled since then, and we're still faced with this inevitable problem because the oil and the gas are not going to be here forever. I don't make predictions about when we're going to run out, but I mean, any rational person can tell you that there's only so much of it. And when it's gone, it's gone. We're not going to be able to get to the last of it. It won't be worth our time or our effort. So we're on the downside of that peak. I don't know where. I don't care if it's a decade or 2 decades or 5 decades. We are going to run out and we are going to be in the worst position we've ever been in as a planet because there's not going to be anywhere to run to. Because in the past civilizations, there have been 34 civilizations. They've all ended in collapse. And when they collapsed, at least some of the people in the city could go back out into the countryside because they had family there, their tribe was there, their people were there. Somebody would maybe take them in. Even during the Great Depression, there were lots of people in America who left cities and went back to the family farm because grandma and grandpa were still there. They had only been one generation removed from that farm. They could go back. And I've talked to people who owned farms in the Great Depression, and they are like, not much changed. We never had much, and we didn't have more then, but we knew we had our chickens and our goats and our cow, and we just kept. There were more jobs down at the paint factory because of blah blah, but we just kept doing what we'd always been doing. We had the smokehouse, we had a pig. They knew how to survive. And so came home from the city, and we let them live here, and it's the same story. Like they basically knew how to do it. Now there's nowhere to go. All the land's been taken. And the land that is being used by agriculture, we blew through it. It's just over because all that's left is just we're eating fossil fuel. And this is the thing that no one's allowed to say out loud. And I don't really get it. Like I get accused, he gets accused. Like the thing they love to say is, oh, you want to kill 6 billion people. I don't want to kill anybody. Like I don't even kill mosquitoes. I put them back outside. I just want us to face reality. And I love this quote from James Howard Kunstler where he says, we need to be reality-based adults. Like not facing reality doesn't change it. We have to face the situation that we're in, or it's going to end. And we all have those nightmare scenarios in our brains, like Mad Max and the science fiction nightmare thing. Yeah, that's where it's going to end. That's where civilizations always end. It doesn't have to be that way. If we just took a look at what we were doing and decided to face it like grown-ups, the only problem is political. It's not like it's chemistry or physics that we're fighting.
But
these are political institutions, and we could rearrange things and have that soft landing and decide to stop destroying our one and only planet. We've got one. Last time I checked, 1 minus 1 is 0. This is all we've got. I don't know why we can't just talk about it like grown-ups. But anyway, that's agriculture, and that's the problem. And that's why we've ended up here. So once you do, let me just finish this one thing. Once you do that, you use up all your stuff. You've run through all the water. You've destroyed all your local riverways. The water table hasn't been filled in decades. All the trees are gone. The fish are gone. Now you've drawn down the soil. You can't even grow your wheat or your corn. What are you going to do? And really the option is either you all die of starvation or you conquer your neighbors and take their stuff. And this is where the imperialism comes in. This is why civilization is always surrounded by conquered colonies, is because you've used up your own stuff. Now you've got to go out and get somebody else's. And the other thing that you're bringing back that's somebody else is, of course, other people, because this entire thing just depends on slavery because it's backbreaking labor. So that's the entire picture and what we've done. That's what I got.
It's going
I
on
want
right
to say
now.
one thing,
Mhm.
which
Go.
is that when we say political, that doesn't just mean like political parties, because people collectively um, don't. People collectively care more about Wi-Fi than they do their own bodies. There's a study out a few years ago. They did a poll of young people, I think in the UK,
25.
people under 25, and given a choice between losing a finger and losing their cell phone, they would rather lose a finger.
Lose a finger rather than lose their phone.
And a significant portion, given a choice between
Sunlight
and
and
Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi. Chose Wi-Fi.
So the point is that it's not just Biden and Trump.
No, that's the real
That's
surface.
that's
That's
when you say
nothing.
political, you don't just mean
I don't mean the political
let's
system.
vote the bums
No,
out.
no. I mean like every
Like
institution that
collectively,
creates
and also
the economic system, all of it, the
and also
ideological system.
our collective desires, because we collectively prefer cheap plastic crap from China than we do life on Earth. And we collectively,
So there's this concept that Jerry Mander made up of he calls it the technosphere as opposed to the biosphere. So it's all the stuff that humans have made. We all live in a world that is essentially the technosphere now, unless you're very lucky, where we are surrounded by human-made objects rather than living creatures. So every city, that's why people go crazy in cities. And I at least have trees around me, but I'm still surrounded by, I live in a house and I have a computer and all this. So we're surrounded by this thing, but the weight of the technosphere has in fact been estimated. And if you took the whole weight of all living creatures on this planet and you compare it to the biosphere versus the technosphere at this point, the technosphere, the human-made stuff, weighs 7 times more
Right.
than what's left of life. 7 times more. That's what we've done. We have taken biotic communities and we have turned them into dead commodities to the point that 7 times more of our stupid crap is what's on this planet right now than living creatures. And that is horrifying. So, yeah,
It
that's
seems
what we've
and
done.
part of the problem, I'll say one more thing and then finally let you get a question in edgewise.
okay.
You can't shut us up once we get going.
Oh,
part of the
as
problem-
always, yeah.
Listen to all my terrible, terrible facts.
Part of the
But-
problem is not just that we prefer, Wi-Fi to sunlight, or we prefer, cell phones to our fingers, but it's also that if your if your food comes from the grocery store and your water comes from the tap, you will defend to the death the system that brings those to you because your life depends on it.
Right.
And if your food comes from the land and your water comes from river, you'll defend to the death that because your life depends on it. And systematically, sorry for using system twice in a row, systematically, the system has put itself in between us and our food supplies. And it has done this forever, and has done this for political and social reasons as well. And also, it's just happened. This is one of the things that happens with agriculture is that people no longer have access to that land, which means that they have to buy from you, which means they have to go to work for you. You now control them. And that's so it's not just everybody is
Bizarrely attached
bizarrely
to some
addicted
strange,
to watching Netflix. It's also that we have been made. It's like you said about, you would talk to your neighbors and they would be able to walk out and say, "Here's how I catch a fish." It's like, I don't know how to do any of this stuff. And a joke I used to make was that I would name a half dozen celebrities, and everybody knows who I'm talking about. I mean, I just, Nicole Kidman or Brad Pitt. I'm way out of date. Whoever the modern versions are, I can name names or I can say Donald Trump for that matter, or Joe Biden. I can name all these, and then I would stop and I would say, okay, suddenly, quickly, name 10 species of edible plants and fungi within 100 yards of your home,
nobody can do it.
including me.
I have no idea.
And so it's like we we all we've been subsumed into the machine. This is sort of the social version of that technological singularity that they keep yammering on about. We're already inside it. I mean, I one last thing, and then I promise I'll shut up. Is that a terrifying realization I had maybe 20 years ago was that I touch plastic more than I touch flesh. That's just horrifying. And that's flesh of trees, flesh of dog flesh, human flesh, anything. I touch plastic more than any of that.
He means his computer keyboard, and
Yeah.
that's true for a lot of us now. Yeah.
It's a skin deprivation
It's
that people,
on the handle of the refrigerator.
Right.
skin deprivation.
Sorry?
I call that skin
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a real
deprivation.
thing.
That's
People are
probably
lonely. Well, they said we have a loneliness epidemic in America. It's all of the ways that people used to feel connected to each other. You can see those charts where it just goes down, 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 and all that's left is the internet now. And it's completely inhuman. It's not, this
one
is
thing.
not a way to connect with human beings.
So I heard stories. That at one point humans used to like
Go to church
sit around a table
and talk.
and like at dinner when they ate, there would be like a collection of, can you believe this? It's just weird. There'd be like 6 or 7 of them sitting around this wood thing and then like talking while they ate. Like they didn't even have the TV on or anything.
Right. There's one
Pretty
thing.
extraordinary. I don't believe it, frankly.
One thing that's interesting. Yeah, right. One thing that's interesting is in Asia, I've traveled to different places, obviously, and I've noticed that students, like even at the level of like college, they lay around on the floor on each other. It's like, they touch each other. They lay there sleeping on
Yeah.
each other. Well,
Little puppy
sometimes they're on
pile.
their phones
Yeah.
now. Yeah. And I see other
But that's
animals.
such a mammal thing. I mean, my dogs do that.
Yeah.
They pile up on each other. That's just what
They
mammals
pile
do.
up on
So
each
social
other.
mammals anyway.
That's right. They
Yeah.
pile up
Yeah.
on each other. That's exactly what they do. They
Mhm.
don't go off and lay in different places. They all lay
Yeah.
together. Well, I have some comments, and then first of all, something that Lierre said, and I know that Derrick says this too, is that when I look at the written record from, say, the Eastern Woodlands, or even all over the United States or the Americas, you'll see them talking about this thing. They're like, why, saying this to the settlers coming in? Why is it that you all want to work so hard unnecessarily? And when they're talking
Yeah.
about agriculture, Miantanomo, for
Mhm.
example, they're the
Yep.
Nagarsura. Yeah. Uh, Another thing is that when you read about cities, so read about Rome, for example, they talk about the walls of the houses were so thin that the wind would blow through, that people were sick. The cities were just absolute cesspools, only until probably what the late 20th century, the late 19th century, yeah, the 1800s. The the late 19th century did you actually have hygiene coming into cities. So this thing about like people didn't live very long is actually reversed. People didn't live
Yeah.
very long in the cities, not in
Yeah.
the nested communities that I
No,
talk.
cities used to act as like population sinks because
Yes,
there'd be too many people in the countryside and like only the eldest son could inherit. So everybody else had to go into the city, and they would often join the army or they would just go to try to find work. But the average life expectancy a lot of times was like 2 years because you would get smallpox, you would get these horrible
TB.
diseases because of like you say, the lack of sanitation. They didn't know what germs were. So nobody knew they were doing it wrong, but they weren't correctly handling human wastes. And yeah, and there was all the coal smoke that everybody was breathing in, or wood smoke inside houses where your lungs were just going to get trashed. So between that and the infectious diseases, people just died.
just
And
the
that's civilization. It's a city. That's what killed people. They weren't having these problems in the countryside.
when I was talking about Rome, just the dead animals that would pile up.
Yeah.
Just
That was a real issue. I mean, in so many cities, well, the dead horses everywhere, and they like what are you going to do with them? It's disgusting. And of course, it's just going to spread diseases. So they had to have like special, processes to get rid of. And also there'd be some livestock. I mean, sometimes people would have like a goat or something or a pig, and those would die too. So then what are you going to do? So they would be these just like huge dead animals just lying around. It sounds really unpleasant. I mean, I remember reading how they multiple times had to close Parliament in the summer because the Thames River was just used as basically everybody's toilet. And the smell, because the Parliament building is right on the Thames, the smell would be so horrible that they couldn't meet, and they would just have to shut down for a month because it was just so ghastly. It was just gag worthy.
And yet, they're like, huh, maybe there's a problem with this.
Yeah,
It's like,
we shouldn't be living this way.
no,
Maybe the river
no.
could be filled with
There's
fish
no
again.
problem.
Yeah.
There's no problem. We'll innovate our way out of it for sure. Just leave it up to the market and Hobbes. It's interesting when you talk about you mentioned Hobbes or red in tooth and nail. What he was describing is London, which we were talking about at the beginning. If you look at London at that time, that's exactly what was going on, as you were mentioning. Uh, this thing about mining the soil and mining the earth, and Derrick
Yeah.
studied at the School of Mines, and we've talked about this before. Would you say that civilization is like a massive mining operation? So it's catastrophic extraction, overshoot, and this kind of thing. Would that be a good way to just characterize it?
Yeah, I think that that is a very apt metaphor for all of it. Some of it's quite literal, and then the rest of it, I think you could apply mining to it. Yeah. What do you think?
Um, I'm going to slightly change the subject. I have more to say on that.
No, go ahead.
Um, it's not really change the subject, but I just recently, so I was teaching a online class, and one of the people in the class brought up something that I had not thought about, and I'm going to dump it back to you when I mention what it is that he thinks one of the main problems with the earth recovering is the way we have mined micronutrients. So can you talk briefly about
Mm.
vegetable losing their
Yeah,
nutritional
there's
value
this
and then
serious problem with the fact that we've mined the soil, doing agriculture, and now there's no minerals left in most of it. So even 100, even 50 years ago, there were way more micronutrients in, whatever you wanted to eat.
rutabagas?
Anything, yeah, pick it, potatoes, peppers, whatever it was you were growing.
Mhm.
And that's just pretty much gone. So the question is, how fast could we bring it back if we were actually applying ourselves to it? But
Or not even we, but
well,
the
oh,
planet.
yeah, it wouldn't even be us. I mean, we don't really have to do it. We just have to get out of the way, and life does it. We don't actually do it, but
So this person was bringing up the concern that this is going to hinder the rewilding of prairies and the rewilding that they don't have those micronutrients that have been pulled out,
dispersed.
dispersed through erosion,
Yeah,
and are now at the bottom of the ocean.
yeah.
And it will
Oh,
take, he thinks, geologic time for them to be redistributed to forests and prairies.
well,
Could be
Derrick, I
right.
think that this kind of goes back to this thing
It
that
has to do with mining because we basically have mined them all.
Lines it all
exactly.
out.
It's not been like
Mm.
one specific gold mine or one specific coal mine where it went down under the earth and grabbed out a seam, but instead it's been taking all these macronutrient or micronutrients who have been that have been distributed for the last billions of years all over the planet, and then yanking them out. And so it's been what's the word for this? Where it's like they do gold mining this way these days, where it's you're taking it, it's very low concentration mining, where you're taking, and this is what they do for a lot of the rare
The rare earths,
earths,
that's the point.
is that they're very low concentrations, and so you just devastate large areas. And this is something that the earth is again paying the price for. Sorry, what were you going to say,
Well,
Layne?
yeah, that was the direction I was heading at. So everybody knows what mining is and the kind of thing you studied in physics and so forth in gold in Colorado there. But this thing that Lierre talks about, she's talking about, and what you said here, we've mined the soil. That was what was going on. So like, if you want to say like Mesopotamia, you have this really rich area, the river basin. We've talked about the Mississippi. They're going to the Zagros Mountains to do the mining, where they were more like picking up the minerals at that time, the lapis lazuli and all of this. But down in the Mesopotamia, they're mining the soils, and that's what was happening. And I think that this goes back to what Derrick was pointing out. Let me
Well,
just
and another way to say all this is that I mean they've been de-earthing, and I got a note from somebody who lives in the Mediterranean, got this note probably 15 years ago saying that she had just realized that the Mediterranean's not supposed to be rocky.
right,
It's not.
right. It's
That's completely human made.
trees.
And
That's desertification. We did that.
yeah, we did it
Yeah.
because it was all forested, cut down the forest, and then the rain
All
pulled
the
it off.
soil just
And
fell into
then
the rivers.
I know you have those great quotes by Mencius. I know you're a fan of his,
Oh yeah,
that he's got
sure,
what?
sure, yeah, Mitches.
Yeah, that he's got these great quotes about So the city of the mountain far away from the city still has hair, still has a forest, and the one next to the city is all bald.
Oh
And
gosh,
gosh, I wonder why.
Yeah.
no fish in the river anymore.
Yeah, and there
He
was some
said,
guy, I don't remember if it was Socrates or one of those old Plato or one of those old dead Greek guys was complaining that deforestation had harmed water quality in Greece. And
but
um,
there's a
like,
couple
wow.
things.
Yeah.
Mencius and Miantonomo said the same thing. They said the exact same thing, word for word. We had plenty of turtles to eat. I mean, they that's a quote from Mencius and from Miantonomo, and it's across the record. You'll see stuff like that. In the case of the, the the last thing you said there, what was that last thing that you said? There was
About
mention.
harming water quality.
Yeah, okay,
Mentioned with
Plato.
the mountain far away from the city was still had trees, and the mountain next to the city did not.
No, the other one on Plato. You know, it's interesting when you read that record. What I did is I took your references and I went and looked them up, and that's how I came up with this paper. When you read that record, what Plato was talking about was Levant. And he's also talking about the water quality, but he was talking about the Levant, and he said like all of these trees are cut down or something. Well, what happened was the anthropologists of the Enlightenment, which is where the term civilization comes from, they said that he couldn't have known about the trees long ago, which is what Plato says he was talking about, the trees long ago. And I thought that this was very interesting because why wouldn't they have known about generations of people talking about timber? I mean, he may not have known exactly about the Levant or whatever, but he knew that there weren't any trees anymore there and that there's this deforestation going on. And then, one thing that was
There's
interesting.
haven't we? I don't know how far. I'm sure one of the two of you, who's a better scholar than I, knows this answer. But how far is Troy from the ocean now? You know, the Trojan War.
They're on the Peloponnese.
Troy is now like 12 miles from the ocean or something because of sedimentation.
Right, right.
Yeah, it's a
They,
long ways.
they kept having to move the ports. Both the Greeks and then the Romans, they kept having to move the port cities because all the soil would just keep washing down, and then the mouth of the port would just completely clog up. So they kept having to move the cities further and further, like 10 miles. And that's
Right.
just soil from the mountains that just is deposited there after it, is destroyed. So that's why the Mediterranean looks like it does, is because they took all the trees off it and then there's no soil. So now it's just like this sort of scrubby outcrops of rock, but that's not what it's supposed to look like.
Well, by about the time of Mencius writing in China, there in Greece, of course, was the silver mining, and so you had Lydia coming, you had the money. We're having another Lydia right now with this whole Bitcoin thing. But what they did is they had the silver coin and they put the goddess of war, Athena, on the front and the owl on the back. So they combined knowledge with war around the silver mining. The Athenian tetradrachma is that coin. And so it's interesting when you put all this together. And then just about 2 months ago, Attica was burning. That's where the academy was. And it's interesting to think of Plato and Attica is burning today, that grove there where they started out, and then you have this history there. Um, when you mentioned the soot in the city, so that was up in the Industrial Revolution. So you see, like say Charles Dickens writing about this, so 200 years ago. Then came industrial civilization, and then around 1950, this thing went on overdrive. And I call
Yeah.
this, Mumford calls this the mega machine. And I think Derrick pretty much uses that term, don't you? Or what do you call that? Do
Yeah, I use Mega Machine. It can go farther back than that. Isn't wouldn't the
Mega
ancient
Machine is
is the bureaucratic top-down military style bureaucracy, which can go all the way back to
the
ancient
work
Egypt.
army or
that's
the actual fighting army, but it's Mesopotamia. It's the very origins of agriculture where suddenly you've got, this hierarchy of the managerial class over the slaves, and the slaves are doing these just enormous earth moving projects, whether it's canals for the agriculture, moving all the water, or, moving insane amounts of rocks to do crazy things like build the pyramids. But regardless, they're just everybody's a cog in a machine is really his point, and that we reached heights of destruction that had never been seen before.
And I really think that I think humans are fundamentally contentious, and I think that we're fairly disagreeable. And I think that the single most important human invention has been the mega machine. Because if you've ever tried to start a nonprofit, you know you can't get six people to work together.
Right.
And or maybe you can, like if all you're doing is building a barn over 24 hours, you can get 50 people to work together. But it's extraordinary to get a million people to all be trying to sell Pepsi Cola, or a million people trying to build a pyramid. And that's anyway. So I think that the mega machine really started thousands of years ago. And what happened with fossil fuels, as you always say, it's just gasoline's just an accelerant.
Mhm.
But the it's a
The pattern
modern
was there.
pattern was
It's
there.
been there for a long time now.
Yeah, I
And I
think
So they
think
just found an extraordinary way to fuel it so that we added machines to the human
no,
machines.
say the thing by Kirkpatrick Sale about it doesn't matter whether you're a Muslim.
Oh yeah, there's this great. I wish I had the quote memorized from Kirkpatrick Sale's book, "The Rebels Against the Future," which is a very good book. I highly recommend it about the Luddites and why they were against these machines and what did it all mean. And the last two chapters are really the ones to read. But he makes this great point that industrialism, that the machine has its own demands and it doesn't really care how it gets its needs met. It will get its needs met. So it doesn't really matter whether it's like small, tidy Japan or whether it's, big, sprawling, messy India or whether it's, imperialist America. You pick your country, it doesn't matter. The machine will be fed. And it doesn't really matter how humans arrange themselves under it. That's the whole point of it, is just to feed this machine whatever it wants and just to keep shoveling in biotic communities and spitting out the other end the more machine. That's what it is.
on the first page of Aristotle's Ethics, he says that politics is about the affairs of the city. So basically, politics and economy are PR for this
Yeah.
machine that you're talking about.
Yep.
I
And it is the thing that's not negotiable.
Yeah.
no, it's
It's
not
like this
negotiable.
is how you end up with all of the, Bill McKibben and all of them trying, even though global warming is killing the biosphere, they're desperately trying to save civilization.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
this is what everybody wants to do. We're called crazy because we want to save the planet and because we want to have a future that includes humans too. It'd be nice if, I mean, I'm not the one who wants to create hell on earth. And it's just this massive cognitive dissonance that you'll have articles in the New York Times about how, gosh, humans may kill ourselves with this way of life. Sometime, humans may go extinct within 100 years. It was Richard Dawkins or it was some fairly famous. It was in the New York Times.
Mhm.
And they can say that, but they can't say, "Hmm, maybe, maybe let's think about changing this arrangement." That is the thing that we cannot question. There's this great line that I've always loved. I don't remember who said it. Unquestioned assumptions are the real authorities of any culture. And we will protect the machine at the expense of life on Earth, at the expense of all life on Earth. We collectively will go to the end. I mean, we haven't ever gotten to talk about the nested bioregionalism, but it's like I wish with every cell in my body wishes that we were approaching the problems we face reasonably and we were having reasonable discussions about what to do about all of this overshoot and and how to bring about the sort of life way that you're discussing. And um and I think it's really important to discuss all this. And I don't know how we get past this absolute devotion to this unquestioned devotion to the machine itself.
Right. Mhm. Well, yeah. Why don't we do a follow-up on this with once we've come to terms with civilization, then bioregionalism as the most reasonable outcome. Let's finish up with, Will Steffen, the great earth scientist who just passed away in the pandemic. If you take all of those major measurements, say for the Earth system, right? So you have population, you have mining, you have all of the pollution going up. So you have metabolism and you have extraction and this kind of thing. Since 1950, this thing's gone on overdrive. So the mega machine, and I call this megapolitron. So the megapolis and tron, which just means acceleration. So you have this acceleration of the megapolis into these regions of megapoli. So you have like Lagos, Nigeria, you have Pearl River Delta. These places are headed towards 50 million, maybe 100 million people just in the next 25 years. This is like UN data. What do you think, Derrick, about this fact, this trajectory? Let's call it trajectory. They call it the trajectory to the Anthropocene. I mean, we haven't really established the Anthropocene, but it's certainly a trajectory towards the Anthropocene.
I'm not sure on what level you're asking me. Ask me again, ask me more specifically.
How does that strike you when this thing called what I'm calling the megapolitron, which is the acceleration of the megapolis, when well, how do you react to that term first?
I agree. The term sounds fine to me.
Mhm.
I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem with that term. How I respond to the reality of it. I mean, the problem I'm having and the reason I'm stammering here is that I don't have any response except that it's absolutely horrifying. I mean, 50 million people in a how do you pronounce the word?
Megapolitron,
Polytron.
right?
Uh, it's madness. It is utter madness. And that's one of the things is I am a 35-year veteran of working on these issues, and it's still I'm left flabbergasted constantly. I've written 28 books or something about this madness, and it still doesn't make any sense to me. Uh, he's asking for a response to like some megalopolises
Acceleration.
are like approaching 50 million people.
It's just madness. It's just- how anybody thinks this can keep going. We're eating fossil fuel. I don't. That's all there is. It's going to
Yeah,
come to an end.
It will end, and
Yes.
I would
We
prefer
could do that gently.
do that
In a
gently.
planned way, but if they don't, if we're not even allowed to talk about it, then it's just going to collapse and it's going to be ugly.
And
That's
every day is
just
uglier.
every day that goes by is going to be, yeah, it'll be worse for the planet and worse for the
I mean,
humans over here.
I keep talking about
It just makes no sense.
how much I love the salmon, and I love salmon for their own sake, and I love salmon for the forest's sake, and I love salmon for the ocean's sake. All that we can just take as a given, and that doesn't alter the fact that part of the reason that I am an environmentalist is because I'm fundamentally conservative. In that, I think
yes.
it's really stupid to destroy a species that you may need to eat tomorrow. I just think that's stupid. And I think that you could probably find a lot of people in your region whose lives have depended on the Mekong Delta catfish who would say the exact same thing. They think it's just stupid to destroy them. I and I think it's stupid to end up with 50 million people in a megalopolis when you don't know how to. I'm a big believer in keeping one's options open when appropriate. And I think when it comes to food sources, it is almost always appropriate to keep one's options open. And the we call ourselves, I mean, it's so funny. One of my favorite jokes I've ever told in anything I've ever written was I mentioned that humans are called Homo sapiens sapiens, and I said they added the second sapiens to make sure we get the joke.
Right, right.
And
This
I
real
just
this
don't,
really turns into comedy, right? As crazy as this stuff is.
I don't know. I don't know how you can want to have, I don't, nobody wants this. I mean, who actually wants for a
Megapolitron.
megapolitron? I mean, when everybody in their neighborhood, when new people move in and they cut down the forest that used to be where you played as a kid, nobody likes it every time. I'm just rambling. Just stop. You say something. You say, what do you think about having 50 million people in a megalopolis?
No, it's madness.
Lagos or the Pearl River Delta was the thing.
We should be having a controlled draw. We should not a
Yeah.
drawdown is the wrong word. A controlled reduction of
Yeah.
population and
The thing
consumption.
that's so crazy is that, in fact, we are having mostly a population. People are actually choosing to have fewer children in most parts of the world now, which is great news. And they're all freaking out. It's every day I see another article about, oh no, the population's going to collapse. What will we do? I'm like, we will be better. Everything will be better with a smaller number of people. And they're like, no, we need more people because it's all a capitalist pyramid scheme, and they have to have an
Right.
ever-growing population base to make it work. I'm like, well, could we think about maybe changing the economic system so that we're not actually eating the planet? I and they're all freaking out. And like it's the thing is happening that we wanted to happen. People are voluntarily having fewer children. We didn't have to impose some kind of horrifying, one child policy like China or do mass sterilizations like in Cuba or anything. It we didn't have to hurt anybody to do this. We just gave women some rights and some birth control and some education. And look what happened. The population naturally started to decline. It was all we ever wanted. So I don't know why we're not celebrating and encouraging them to do it more.
Right now, every continent except Africa
Has in
is in
population
population decline.
decline. It's not
And
going to be fast enough, but it's a really good sign that we could do this. If we added a few more carrots to this, we could really get it done enough to save the planet.
and the response by the Russians is we need to have sex holidays where everybody goes home from work and has sex.
Well, it's worse than that. They're trying to make birth control illegal and they're trying to make abortions illegal. So we're going to be right back to.
Japan also. Elon Musk is
it's
also talking about this.
And Japan is an island.
Right, I know.
How can you not know that you have a carrying capacity? At least the United States is huge. Like I get why people don't necessarily have it in their brains, but come on, an island? Yeah, I don't know.
Well,
It just seems crazy to me.
We should all be celebrating this.
We should. It should be the best news of my lifetime. Like, look, we actually started to do the right thing as a species.
I think with this particular discussion today, I wanted to come to terms with civilization. I think we got it, right? So
Okay.
I think that people listening can at least try to come to terms with the gravity of the situation, the disconnect, the psychological geography, the reorientation that needs to be done. And of course, I point to bioregionalism, which is democratic confederation and all of that kind of thing. For a follow-up in a couple months, let's revisit and talk about once we've come to terms with civilization, what can we do? Rewilding,
Great.
bioregionalism,
Let's do
rematerialization.
it.
Yeah, so
Happy
thanks.
times.
I
There's
really
hope.
do. There's plenty
There's
of
hope, everybody. There's hope. We can
So
still do this. We can
I want
still
to
do
leave
this.
us with hope
Yeah, go ahead.
or with optimism. And they both have to do with the former Soviet Union.
Go for it.
One thing that gives me great optimism, frankly, is Chernobyl. That the second worst nuclear disaster in human history, and the buffalo are back. Or, I mean, the European buffalo are back,
bison, yeah.
and
Wolves.
the wolves are back.
No,
The
not
beavers
just
are back.
wolves. Multiple packs of wolves. That's how much life there is. That can support multiple packs of apex predators.
The Przewalski's horses are
Those
there,
little wild horses. So
and
cute.
the point is that
There's
use
those eagles that nobody had seen in like 100 years. They're back.
and use
Enormous eagles.
life
Life wants to live. And all you had to do was take the humans out and look, it all came back.
And
They have genetic damage. I don't want to pretend it's all fine,
Yeah.
but they're there and they're surviving and they've occupying their niches and they're making everything whole again.
and the second worst nuclear disaster in human history is more destructive. I mean, it's less destructive than the everyday workings of agriculture. And then also, there are more than 450 dead zones in the oceans, and one of them has recovered.
Only one.
And it's in the Black Sea off the coast of the former Soviet Union. And it's because agriculture became no longer economically viable. So they stopped doing agriculture, and within 20 years, the dead zone had recovered enough that they had a fishery. I'm not too thrilled that they have a fishery, but I'm thrilled that the fish are back. And
That's all it took
the
was
thing,
humans stopping. All we have to do is stop the destruction,
and the thing
and life
is,
will come back.
the thing is, but that doesn't mean, oh, don't worry about anything. Things will be okay, because
We have to stop the
bodies
destruction.
bodies have. I got bit by one of my dogs the other day. Um, little Tony, he's a terrier. He's a terrierist, and anyway, he's a sweet dog, except when he's not. Anyway, my body's healing on its own. This is what bodies do: is you get a wound, it closes up, it heals, it knows how to do it. Nature's the same way. But the thing is, if you push it too far, the body dies. And the same is true for wild nature. If you push too hard, I don't know if the Mediterranean forests will ever come back. And I don't know if, and then they will certainly not come back within a human lifetime. Some places can come back quickly, some places will never come back at all. The passenger pigeons are gone, and which might mean that the chestnuts would be gone even without the chestnut blight. And but if you don't push it too far, there is tremendous. Here's what I want to say: the planet has been incredibly forgiving. That doesn't mean that it will remain forgiving forever, but it has to this point been incredibly forgiving.
Thank you so much, and we'll come back and talk about next time what's going on, all of that, all the positive stuff. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you.
I've been speaking with Lierre Keith and Derrick Jensen, ecophilosophers, poets, activists, and we've been discussing my paper on bioregionalism as a theoretical ecology and possible reorientation. See you again.